Everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Sarah Traver. I'm the director here at Traver Gallery, and I'm very pleased to do this exhibition walkthrough with Preston Singletary and Lisa Liedgren. We have a very special exhibition up this month. This is something of a memorial exhibition for an artist who is beloved in the Seattle glass community, Joseph BenVenuto. And the show presents his work alongside 13 artists who were dear friends and collaborators of his. So we're going to introduce you to his work today. Preston and Lisa, you guys knew Joe so well. You were so close with him. Thank you for taking the time today to walk through and introduce Joe's work to our audience. I'm hoping you can share some stories and give us some insight into who Joe was. Lisa, you want to start? This is really your brainchild. You really made this exhibition happen. What was your relationship with Joe?
So I got to know Joe in 2013, and we became close, and we did some work together. I followed his artistic process, and he shared his work with me over the years. And then as he got ill and diagnosed with his brain cancer in 2016, I helped to look at the work that he had in the studio that he wanted to share, and we talked about planning for an exhibition, and he gave me some instructions on how to think about the work and so on. I would say, as being an artist myself, what I felt that I shared with Joe over the arc of time was our appreciation for the artistic and creative process.
Yeah, so much of this work is very connected to process, and we'll look at some of that in detail as we kind of walk through the exhibition. I'll look forward to hearing more insights on that for sure. And Preston, Joe worked with you for over 20 years, is that, or about 20 years?
I think we started working together probably in 1980, 98, 99. Well, we actually worked at Benjamin Moore's studio. He was the cold worker, and he would grind all the glass that was produced in the studio. And that's where I first met him. We worked there for a few years, and he really was keen on, so Joe grew up in Ohio. He started working with stained glass initially, I remember from stories that he told me, and then he moved to New York and wanted to work at the what was called New York Experimental at the time, Urban Glass today. And so then he made a move out west, and that's when he started to work at Benjamin's studio. And so at one point, I know he was keen on getting into the glass studio to work in the hot shop rather than doing the cold work. And so the team was pretty settled at that point, so there was no extra position that he could assume. So he left the studio, and then he approached me about working because he knew that I was getting some momentum, and he says, if you need help glass blowing, call me. And so that's when we started to work together, and that was about, like 98, I would say, somewhere in there. And then, so then he became my main assistant for many years. Assistant is a technical term, but he always he worked with lots of people, friends of his, because he just liked the community, and he fit right in. He was grinding people's glass, and he was helping me. And then when my studio grew, we ended up, he helped me a lot, getting everything established and moving things and setting things up. And then when I moved down to South Lake Union into a bigger studio, then he was real instrumental in keeping the hot shop running and kind of managing that, and then he would take the glass and he would grind it, and then, but that led to a really deep, friendship and connection. And, we, traveled quite a bit. We would go across the country and do demos when I had an exhibition, or we would travel, we made trips to New Zealand and Japan and all over. We were really close, and Joe was just one of a kind. He was just a very sweet person. He would notice on the calendar, like, oh, you're traveling, and he would say, do you need a ride? I said, well, Joe, it's flight's at 7 in the morning. I got to get there at 5 or 5:30. He goes, oh, that's okay. I'll be up anyway. And so he would go and he would, to Espresso to Go in Fremont, and he would grab me a coffee, and then he'd show up in his truck, and that'd be like, I'd dash out and get in the car, and he'd hand me a coffee. It's like, jumpstart my brain, to get on the airplane and all that stuff. So he was just, he meant so much to my family too, because he, when I was traveling, I remember he would always check in with my wife, and is everything okay? If there was ever any emergency, Osa could call Joe, and he would help her figure stuff out. And so he was just really, one of a kind. And so we spent all those years working together, and all the time he was making pieces. Some of the pieces that are here are like pieces, and so he did everything from the glass blowing to the cold working to casting glass. He would obviously grind the glass and get it ready for me to work on. Fusing glass, so lots of different techniques, and he was really good across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, one of the things that has been reflected to me from a number of the artists that are part of this show, and from others that know or knew Joe, his attention to detail.
Yeah.
And that, I think, comes through so strongly in this work. And Lisa, you mentioned that process. Mm-hmm. If we can look at one of these pieces, we'll try and get the camera up close enough so that we can see what he's doing here. But can you guys describe a little bit about his process and what this work is about?
What I can begin to share, I'm going to lead the process of how it came together in terms of glass to Preston. Because I'm not as familiar with the actual process. What I can speak to this is Joe had a degree in anthropology, and so colors, texture, everything that speaks to nature has influenced his work. And this is a kind of weaving with glass, right? And I will let Preston see if you can speak a bit more to the details.
Yeah, a little bit. This is a kiln formed piece. We call it, fused glass. And so basically it's just different, pieces of glass that are cut up and then fused together to create this kind of herringbone pattern or whatever we're looking at here. And then, because it was so closely tied to weaving, he had a very keen interest in weaving in general. And so I remember we traveled to Santa Fe quite a bit, and he was really interested in the weaving down there, Navajo rugs and things like that. We'd go, visit supply shops and things like that. So this is, so once these pieces are cut up and then fused, and it's kind of a mosaic of different patterns that are, arranged in this way and then melted back together. So this glass is called bullseye glass, and it's kind of family of different glass colors that actually they melt together, and they're it's like a family of colors. So it is a material that's pretty commonly used, and it's a company out of Portland.
Yeah, they're really, I mean, I just love to think about Joe working in the studio and creating these, I mean, they almost come together like a puzzle, or like you said, like a mosaic, like intricately placed pieces, and then, you know, melted just enough to retain the integrity of the pattern, but not, but then fused together. They're really special works. Also in the show are the bottle forms that I love these. They're really sophisticated pieces, and they are glass, although they don't have a lot of the qualities of most pieces of glass sculpture that you see. They're opaque. They have a lot of texture on the surface, but at the end of the day, they are vessels, and he plays with this idea of that, like, what is a vessel and the functionality of a vessel. And I think that's fun to see, since so much glass starts as a vessel. Just kind of playing with that notion. Did he share any insights about these pieces with you, Lisa?
So, not a whole lot. My understanding, these pieces was started out in 2006, maybe even sooner. What comes to mind as I look at them is sort of that reflects Joe, as I knew him, very utilitarian, like being very, you know, here I think he plays with the sort of notion of an object that could be both utilitarian and standing on its own. It's hollow, but the hole here at the top, it's non-functional. Nothing can be placed in them.
I love this grouping too. It reminds me almost of like mountain forms, like the way that it kind of stack together and the relationship between the pieces, I think is really beautiful. Another really different piece from the other work in the show is this red and black one. It's so modern. It reminds me of like Russian constructivism or something. I mean, it's just like such a beautiful graphic piece.
Right, and I think this is the only piece, it's not the only piece in the show, but the two panels that works as one single artwork, and that that there's a thoughtful composition in these panels, playing with the two panels at the same time. Also, I think as you approach the piece, as a viewer, when you approach the piece, you really can't see the detail in the what do you call, like the woven like glass, unless you're really quite close. Also, I would say of everything in the work, in the show, it's definitely the strongest, brightest color. I've never seen like this bright red on his work before. I think it's a stunning piece. There's also, what's interesting with this is that the black is completely solid. All the other panels have the woven texture in them.
Preston, would he have done this the same way as the other pieces, or is this like a water jet cut and then inlaid?
I believe it's probably cut sections that, you know, of the black to frame the red, and then all fused together. You know, you can't really see the line or the connection point, but you know, that being the same material black, it just really melts together and becomes more of a solid, you know, surface. And he did a lot of cold working on the surface to sharpen up the lines. So I think that was probably, just sort of cutting a little square here and square here, these two triangles, or I mean rectangles, and then fusing it so you can see that, you know, it was definitely master of like subtlety, you know.
Yeah.
Just perfect execution. He was just very exacting in almost everything he did. I mean, it was like, he would show up with like a white T-shirt all the time. He was known as his uniform, white T-shirt and cargo pants. When he was working, and just about any time you'd see him. We were teaching at Pilchuck one time, and everybody noticed, who just wears these Hanes T-shirts? And so somebody in the class bought a whole bunch of Hanes T-shirts and wrote, official Joe B. glass blowing wear, on the sleeve, and passed it out to all the students. It was pretty endearing.
Can we take a look at, there's a piece over here that, something that he was working on with you in terms of thinking about your basket work. Will you share that story, Preston?
Yeah, and I think it was kind of the symbiotic of the whole, that whole moment when, he always had an interest in weaving, and a lot of friends that wove, and so he was always really dialed into the whole loom weaving process. But we thought about the baskets, and this was one that we had anticipated bringing it into the hot shop and then rolling it up into a cylinder and then blowing a vessel out of it. And we never really got around to that, but it was definitely kind of, it just kind of fed into the whole idea of making these panels as well. But yeah, he definitely took the initiative and developed the whole technique that we never really tapped into.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know that about this piece when we were installing it, and I thought the band of the sort of cream at the top was so interesting, such a different kind of compositional choice than the other pieces, and I love hearing that story about, so then if that became a cylinder, then that almost is like that lip wrap that you put on top of your baskets.
Yeah, the little border.
Although I think it stands alone, it's so beautiful as it is as a flat panel too.
Absolutely.
So part of this show, Lisa, was working with a number of Joe's artist friends. Can you share a little bit about that process and what was asked of those artists and what else we see in the show?
Sure. So, as I mentioned back in 2016, Joe and I talked about me helping him to work and create a show. He was, as he was showing me all the work in the studio and the panels and so on. After his passing, when I thought about Joe's work that he had left behind, that I took care of, I associated. I'm going out in a tangent here. I associated his work equal with his community. That's how he spoke about his art, his appreciation for the material, for the creative process. There were always the reference to other people and his peers. So for me, that was as much is informed in this work. So when I looked at the work, and I invited you both to the studio, and as we put it up and looked at it, it became clear that the show, not only would it stand on its own by the work, but that it would be a natural extension to invite his community to, I think, as a way to show appreciation, the reciprocity. Yes.
Yeah.
So as I start to talk, as Preston and I start to talk about this, and we talked about different ways of how his peers, his colleagues could participate, and we landed on a very free, like an invitation to create something in response to that would reflect the relationship that they had to Joe, but also to not give parameters that would define what it would be. So all of the work is created with that in mind, and most of it new.
Yeah. Maybe we can take a look at a couple pieces. What, I think that that's such a wonderful idea and so represents who Joe was. One of the things that's sort of surprising in this show is that, Joe never showed his work in galleries. And so, this is work that was at the studio. We obviously took time with, thought about deeply. It's exceptional work, but like that commercial aspect of making art seems like that wasn't what it was about for him.
It was a little bit like Henry Darger or somebody, just like making work and just toiling away on these things in his spare time in the evenings or weekends or whatever. He would just be making this stuff, and then, I always encouraged him to show and the work, and because he traveled around with me quite a bit when we were, when I had an opening, and he was, like for instance in Santa Fe, he would drive his studio down to Santa Fe and allow us to do demonstrations to educate people around what it takes to make glass. And so, he would just kind of walk away at the end of the day and just shake his head. He goes, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. You make all the work, you sit here at the openings and you talk to people, and, and sometimes it gets kind of exhausting, just like, talking about the work, for 2 or 3 hours, and he goes, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do it. And I said, you could do it if you wanted. You just, you get started and then you learn how to do it. But it was something that he just, unfortunately, he never got around to, sharing it with a broader audience or in a gallery context.
But what is really clear is that was a huge meaning to Joe was the community, right? Like the people that he worked with and his friends and helping others to make their work. And so I love seeing the other pieces that are in the show. This piece by Sean Albert, for example, which is a really fun, thoughtful piece of a blue chanterelle. And I'm not going to remember what the actual scientific name for the blue chanterelle is, but it is a thing that exists and can be found in the alpine wilderness, but it's quite rare, and I guess he refers to it as Joe's white whale, like the mushroom he didn't ever find.
Yeah. That was a big thing for Joe. Like, as much as he was a hard worker, he always would, want to go out into the nature, and he was really big on mushrooming. He had some secret spot where he would just collect, bushels of chanterelles, like 10 gallons, 2 5-gallon buckets full, and then so I'd show up at home, and then there would be like a bowl of fresh chanterelles just sitting there. He'd drop them off after a day of, foraging. And so everybody, and there was a lot of people that were, even here in the exhibit, you can see other, other pieces that make the mushroom reference. And so that was part of his, coping mechanism, because he was such a hard worker. Like I say, he always put himself out to anybody who, he had, his close friends, he wanted to help them work in blow glass, because he loved the process, and so he, most of the people in the studio are people that he's worked with directly in the hot shop, or, we're cold working their pieces and stuff, so it's,
I think of Joe in his home. I remember, and I remembered after he was telling me how the way he set up his home was that there wouldn't really be any place where you would completely just lounge or sit, or no TV, no place where you would just waste time. I think time was really on his mind, in the sense that he took advantage of time and he really liked to stay active. Like that was something that I sort of absorbed from him, and he didn't want to have a home that we just like lay down, right? And so always active. But I was thinking, as you were talking about the work in here, I think what makes the exhibition interesting sort of today, as I look at it, is more the notion of it's so important that when we think about the artist, like the role of the artist and the person itself, it's sort of this through line of making work without necessarily have a goal to show it, like the value of that. I think he kind of grew into actually wanting to go a little bit more into the spotlight, but that was a process that sort of started to take place later in his life, right? And so he was talking about wanting to weave baskets, and he started actually to do that on a very, basic kind of way. So he didn't get to continue with that, but I think he really had a desire to move into that space.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your stories about Joe and giving us some insight into who he was in the community as an individual and as an artist. And truly, it's a really special exhibition to be hosting in the gallery. And it's wonderful to see Joe's work on display. It's been almost 10 years since his death, and I know everyone misses him dearly. We had a wonderful opening event here for the exhibition, and it felt like the community really showed up, which is just a reminder how a person's legacy remains in the community. And I'm just really thrilled to be able to show his work and show the work of the artists that he loved alongside it. And I hope you all can come in and see it in person. It really is quite extraordinary. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.